Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. This week I am back with Kelly and PozzA, and before we look ahead to the Le Mans GP and our predictions, which I am definitely bitter about, I just want to talk about some news that's come up this last week and a bit. And the first part of that is the Khazakstan Grand Prix has been postponed. It's been postponed due to a state of emergency brought on by extreme flooding, but obviously it was always a bit skeptical if it was going to be happening or not. So I'm kind of curious as to if you guys actually think it'll happen this year. What do you reckon, Poz?
Like to see at least one race around the track because it doesn't look too awful. It's not like Finland in my opinion, which I didn't really like the layout of at all. So I hope they can fit it in somewhere just so we can see if it's a good track or not. But realistically, it wouldn't surprise me if it just gets cancelled again.
I honestly think it's going to get cancelled. Like, it's not that I don't want it to run. I think the layout of the track is actually quite nice. But when it comes down to it, if you're going to cancel a Grand Prix this late, I don't see where they're going to be able to fit it in. Like, at this short notice, I don't see a place where they're actually going to be able to fit in a Grand Prix. So I think for this season, it'll be cancelled. And I'm honestly quite unsure if they want to bring it back for next season. But yeah, we'll see.
I have to agree. I'd really love to see it because I adore the track layout. I think it'd be quite mixed and quite balanced. So I hope it happens, but I also, again, don't think it's going to happen this year just because of how jam-packed the end of the year is. For example, we've got 9 races in 12 weeks, and that's going to be absolutely brutal. And podcast recording is going to be extra fun at the end of the year. Another bit of news that came out in the last few weeks comes from the CCO of Dorna, Dan Rossamando, who is the American shaking things up, basically, at Dorna. He announced that the brand of MotoGP will be getting a revamp at the end of the year, and while we don't quite know how deep a dive they're going to do, it's safe to assume things like the logo and the font, possibly even the championship trophy, will all be looked at. What are your thoughts on the news, Kelly?
When I first read it, I wouldn't say terrified, but I was like, oh no. Um, I really like MotoGP as it is now, especially the championship trophy. I'd be really, really upset if they change that. So I'm hoping they keep that as is. Changing the logo, obviously it's a huge part of the brand, and I have no problem with it if it was like a slight change, but if they completely change it, I don't think many people would be happy. Because like the way it is now, it does carry like a good bit of history, and to just like change it like that and be like, it's a fresh start. It's not. So yeah, for me personally, I'm not very happy about it. But maybe other people are. For me, it's not a thing for me. I'm not very happy about it at all.
I completely agree with Kelly there. One of the main things about the trophy specifically that I like is at the end of the season, the world champion gets to like physically add their own piece of history to the trophy. But I just really like the meaning behind it. So I hope that doesn't change in particular. Um, if the logo gets just like a small change, but still sort of stays the same, like it's not a brand new logo with like a completely different meaning, I wouldn't be too upset about it. But yeah, I hope some stuff like the trophy stays the same.
Yeah, I adore the trophy, and I know there will be a point when we do have to swap it, but I can see that being well down the line because it will get too big at some point, but it's definitely not too big at the moment. And yeah, adding that extra little bit at the end of the season's just quite nice. And it, yeah, adds to the history, which I enjoy. So, wildcards have been announced for Yamaha. So, Cal Crutchlow is going to be taking part in the Italian Grand Prix at Mugello, the British Grand Prix, his home GP at Silverstone, and the San Marino GP in Misano. Considering that Yamaha have concessions and he could do 6 wildcards, do you guys think that we'll see him at another race or any more?
I'd like to think that they'd add, considering they have Cal down to G3, I'd like to see they'd have another rider down to G3. Who that would be, I really don't know. Maybe Poz would have a better idea than me, but I wouldn't want to see Cal come in for more than 3 races. I'd want to give someone else a chance, per se. But then again, don't take my words with a grain of salt. If Cal performs within those 3 races, I can definitely see them bringing him back for another few.
I do hope that Yamaha actually use the concessions they've been given to their fullest extent. Whether that be with Crutchlow doing all 6 races that he can, or whether they bring in another rider to do a couple of them. Just as long as they actually use them to try and start improving the bike. It's obviously not as bad as Honda is at the minute, but it's still not great. They're not going to do well. I do hope they can use them to improve. Moving on to something that we missed last week, with the Japanese Cup that we've been following in Jerez for the sprint race. I have to check up on this, but I'm pretty sure it was still Quartararo that was top after his penalty.
Yeah, it definitely was still Quartararo.
And in the main race, it was Mir who finished ahead of all the other Japanese bikes in P12. Alex Rins was 13th, Nakagami 14th, and Fabio Quartararo was P15, starting from 23rd. The last 6 bikes that actually finished the race were all Japanese bikes with Bradl and Marini behind. So probably not the greatest of displays by the Japanese bikes. Obviously, still some improvement to do. But at least they've put some more points on the board.
And in the standings, Joan Mir is on 12 points and Quartararo is on 25 points. So those obviously aren't some big numbers, especially when Jorge Martin's up there with 92. So it's safe to say that they're not going to be in this championship battle this year. Not that we really expected them to be.
We definitely did not expect them to be anywhere near the championship battle this year. I was expecting it more to be between like Bagnaia and Martin, and it's not even really between them. It's between like 5 different riders who are winning the races, but even just looking at testing, we knew full well Yamaha and Honda were not going to be anywhere near there.
And I do still think that Pedro is in this championship fight, that's for sure. Even if you guys aren't ready to believe it.
I'm very ready to believe that Pedro Acosta is in the championship battle now. I had to think about it a little bit more because I hadn't seen like, I don't like to judge off like what 3 races. I don't like to judge that early, but now looking at it, he's been very consistent, so I can see it happening. But I don't like to judge too early because, as we've seen before, judging and celebrating early doesn't end very well for me.
I just still feel like the top 3 of Martin, Bagnaia, and Marquez are just that bit too strong for Pedro at the minute.
I'd definitely be inclined to agree because those 3 have so much more experience and we know that they'll be able to sustain their form throughout the year. So it will be quite interesting to see. One thing I do want to touch on while we've just been talking about the Japanese manufacturers is obviously the testing. I'm just going to give a brief rundown of what happened in the MotoGP testing. We're going to start with Yamaha, and as always, if you're watching the video version of this, I will have some photos on screen because Yamaha's aero is a combination of KTM and Aprilia's. There's been no massive breakthrough, but both Fabio Quartararo and Alex Rins spoke very positively about the new aerodynamics. However, it will not be ready for the Le Mans GP. One thing that's blindsidingly obvious about this new aerodynamics is the wings at the front. Aprilia have the 2-style Formula One wings. Yamaha made it 3. I have to admit, I'm looking forward to the new regulations because I do hope this sort of thing gets quite limited because I know it's the pinnacle of racing and I know it's all supposed to be really good and exciting, but I just don't like the fact these motorbikes aren't looking like a motorbike that I'd ride anymore. And yeah, just a little pet peeve, really. Honda, the other Japanese manufacturer, haven't taken a huge step forward, but it does sound like they have taken the first step in the direction of a new concept, so I'm really, really hoping that that turns out for them. Aprilia were running an altered version of the new tail that we've been seeing this year. It's without the top part of the aerodynamics and seemingly like positive results. I'm curious to hear more about it once they start race testing it and things like that, because it's interesting. One other thing for Aprilia is that Raul Fernandez tested the 2024 bike. While it's not expected for him to be on the entire 2024 package until Mugello, he did comment saying it's not easy to adapt to this bike quickly, especially to understand the aerodynamics. And that just proves that aero is having such a big part of MotoGP at the moment. Like it or not, it is here currently, and it's so, so important for these riders to be able to understand what that aero is doing to their bikes so they can get the most out of it. KTM tail is getting more detailed, and they tested a lot of side paneling aerodynamics, and basically it does sound like KTM continue to be the ones who are testing the bounds of the aerodynamics, along with the one manufacturer that I couldn't find much information of because they were just quiet and confident, and that was Ducati, which doesn't bode well for the rest of the field considering how dominant they are already. But that's just an extremely brief rundown on the testing. If you have any questions about testing, let me know in the comments below and I will answer them as best I can. Before we move on to the predictions, we do just want to give a shout out to JuniorGP rider Cormac Buchanan. He got his first pole at the weekend and he converted that into a second podium, a second P3 in a row. So absolutely great work by him.
Yeah, definitely a very, very good race. I sent him a good luck message on behalf of our whole team here. He said thank you very much and he'd hoped to win it. Unfortunately, he did lose that a little bit over halfway into the race, even if the race was only set at 2/3 of the actual race distance. I wouldn't say I was upset. Obviously I wanted him to get the win. I was all excited when he managed to keep the lead. But yeah, no, I was very, very happy with the podium. And Jesus, honestly, a Finnish rider actually won. I was like, damn, okay, because you don't see that in MotoGP. It's normally Spanish or so on, so on. But it was really cool to see all the different kind of flags on the podium. Uh, that's honestly all I have to say. I mean, oh no, actually, Casey O'Gorman, man of my own heart, an Irish lad, was on the fight for the podium and the win, and high-sided, went right off the track. He is okay, but it was definitely a bit of a pain to watch that happen. Apart from that, Cormac made my feelings a bit better, and definitely a good race for JuniorGP.
Yeah, and that high side was quite scary, and I found it quite impressive that he apologized as he was crashing still to the rider behind him. That was quite entertaining. But yeah, we're definitely keeping an eye on Cormac being a Kiwi and this podcast originating down under. So we will keep you updated as hopefully he continues to do well. So our predictions, they are interesting to say the least. Kelly may or may not be in the lead all of a sudden. I may or may not be last, so I'm not taking it personally. Kelly absolutely nailed it last week, getting Via and Aldeguer and Martine actually. So she got 3 race winners, which definitely gave her a bunch of points, and she's now sitting on 95 points. PozzA's just behind on 91, and I'm well behind on 81. So who would like to give their Moto 3 predictions first?
I'll give mine first, considering they haven't they haven't exactly changed, as you lot know. never really changed them. So for Moto3, of course, because he did me so well, I have Colin Vire, P2, Daniel Gardo, P3, David Alonso. Who would have guessed? Not me. It's the exact same. And then for a reserve, I've actually changed it. I've put it to Kelso. I have faith in him. He's actually been more consistent than I thought he would be, so hopefully him as my reserve will do me some good.
P3, I think it's going to be Alonso. P2, Ortola, and P1, Hogado. My reserve for this week is Yamanaka just because he was really strong here last year. So, yeah, having reserves is always a strange feeling because you do want them to do well, but also they're not actually in your team unless something goes wrong for another rider, and we definitely don't want that.
For my predictions, Moto3's pretty much the same as I've done all year. Pretty sure I've only predicted 6 different riders so far. But I've gone for Daniel Holgado in P1, just with it being Tech 3's home race. He won here last year. Didn't have the best weekend in Jerez. I do think he'll come back from it. P2, I've put Ivan Ortola. Again, he did really well here last year, which is a basis of a lot of my predictions this week. P3, David Alonso. Obviously, was looking like he was going to dominate Jerez until he crashed out at the last corner on the first lap. I think he'll recover to a podium this time. And as my reserve, I've put Colin Vire just because Rueda, I still don't think we'll be back to 100% next week. For Moto 2, my podium predictions are actually all Bosca-Scarrow chassis. I've put Fermin Aldeguer in first. Same reasoning as last week. I feel like if he just puts a clean race together, he can pretty much dominate. P2, I've put Lopez. In a couple of races since he got his last podium. I just think he'll do really well this weekend. And P3, Sergio Garcia's just looked really consistent at the start of the season, putting in the good results. So I think he'll be up there as well. And as my reserve, I've put championship leader Joe Roberts on a streak of 3 straight podiums in second place, so I do think he'll do.
Moto 2, Fermin Aldeguer, obviously. Who would have guessed? Not me again. P2, Alonso Lopez, and then P3, Roberts. And then for reserve, I have Garcia. So I have essentially switched it out. I have Garcia off the podium and put him as a reserve, and then I put Roberts on the podium.
For Moto 2, P3, I've got Tony Arbolino, who I'm really, really hoping finds his form again. P2, I've got Roberts, just because it'd be quite funny to do 4 P2 positions. And in P1, Fermin Aldeguer, because I am the newest member of his fan club. So, yeah. Reserve, I've got Alonso Lopez. For the GP guys in the sprint, I've got Brad Binder in P3. Still holding out hope that he's going to make a run for the title charge. P2, I've got Pecco Bagnaia, and P1, Jorge Martin. Betting against him in a sprint just seems like the wrong thing to do. For my reserves, I've gone different reserves for each days this week. For my reserve for the sprint, I've gone Pedro Acosta, and for my reserve for the main race, I've gone Brad Binder. For the race, my podium, I've gone Pecco Bagnaia for P3, Pedro Acosta for P2, and Jorge Martin for the top spot. I think, yeah, Martin's going to do the double, I think.
For the MotoGP sprint, obviously our favourite sprint merchant is P1, Jorge Martin. P2, Enea Bastianini. I hold faith he will get a podium. And then P3, Marc Marquez, and my reserve, Pedro Acosta. MotoGP race, honestly almost the same. Marc Marquez as P1, Pecco Bagnaia filling in for Brad Binder after he did me dirty last time in P2, and then for P3, Pedro Acosta, and my reserve is Jorge Martin.
For the sprint, I've put Jorge Martin P1, shockingly. Same reasoning as always, he's the sprint king at the moment. P2, I've gone for Marco Bezzecchi. Again, did really well here last year, won the main race. I think he got a podium in the sprint race. I do think he'll have a pretty solid weekend this week. Got a podium last time out in Jerez as well. And P3, I've gone Marc Marquez. Looks like he's just about figured out how to ride the Ducati properly. Obviously nearly won last time in Jerez. And as my reserve, I've gone Pecco Bagnaia. Same reasoning as last week. It's a European season now, just generally when he starts to peak. And in the race, I've gone Bagnaia P1. Same reasoning. Gone Jorge Martin P2. I feel like he'll just try and settle for a podium after crashing out of the lead last week. And P3, I've gone for Bezzecchi to get another podium as well. And Marc Marquez reserve.
It's definitely the time when Pecco starts to show up, and I think after last week, he will continue to have some form, and so it'll be quite interesting to see. I don't think we're going to see Quartararo on the podium like last year, I think it was. As always, we would absolutely adore to hear your predictions. Have a wonderful week. I will be attending the race at Le Mans. I will remember my headset this week, and we will be throwing up another vlog about the experience. I'm doing a Moto 3 experience with the MLAV team in Moto 3, so it will be all based around that. We will be here, as always, every single week. See you next week.